I know that usually people are not excited to talk to the lawyer. That's okay, I'm not mad about it, I get it. But my goal for today is to do anything that we can to reduce the odds of something unfun and legal related happening in your life. So we actually put out a list of a few options to see what people were most interested in hearing about. And apparently you guys are having a lot of adventures in hiring, and that's not really a surprise, right? Everybody is having a difficult time finding the right people to get work done lately. And even once you find them and you're interviewing them, how do you not put your foot in it and do something that's going to cause you a problem later during that process? So that's what I want to talk about today. So here's kind of the overview of where we're going for the next hour or so, right? We're going to look at background checks, pros, cons, how do you do them? How do you do them without screwing them up and violating the law, getting yourself in trouble? We're going to talk about discrimination claims in hiring. How do you avoid putting your foot through one of those? What should you not be asking during the hiring process to avoid a problem? And last but not least, what do you do about social media issues, right? This comes up more and more and causes a lot of problems for folks. So let's get some context. First of all, what is hiring looking like for you guys? Probably not fun. There's actually a pretty high percentage of folks in the skilled trades in Michigan in comparison to the rest of the country. We also, in Michigan, have the third highest rate of employment in the septic industry out of any state. Now, I know this is a hard thing to get data on, so I'm not vouching for any of the stats in great detail, but when we're thinking about it in the big picture, we're actually doing better than a lot of states in Michigan. But applications for positions across the skilled trades dropped significantly from 2020 to 2022. That's the last year that they have data on that I could dig up, right? So all that said, there are a lot of people out there, but people aren't necessarily looking to move at exactly the time that you need them. And it's not necessarily the person that you're looking for they're not gonna walk in your door all on their own. So when you're trying to identify and sort through the right candidates, you wanna find the right person who's gonna become part of your business, who's gonna stick it out and be with you in the long term so you're not training a new person every 6 months, right? But identifying those people is not always easy. This chart, I think, is actually a pretty good summary that explains why there's a lot of difficulty in this area. This is a chart breaking down the average age of installers. Again, I can't guarantee how detailed this data is. It's not anything super fancy, but it's based on applicants in a national database, right? That's who's out there doing this work. So if you are looking to recruit new people into your business, right? Maybe you've had a multi-generational family business that the next generation isn't in a position to take on. You're looking outside perhaps for the first time in a while. It is hard to find people who are at an entry level in their career a lot of the time. So this is all stuff you guys already know from your practical experience of the world in all likelihood, right? But that gives some context on why this conversation is worth having and why it's important to hire right. So I'm going to try and make sure that everybody's awake. So this is partially just a who's drunk already, who's upright, who's awake check. How many people have had trouble identifying good candidates in the last couple of years? Who has struggled with that? I see some hands. I see some evidence of awake people. I love that. Okay. How many people are worried right now about filling roles in the next couple of years? This isn't on there, but I'm kind of curious. How many people are hiring outside of their family for the first time, recently or in the near future? Yeah, I know that that's happening. I have colleagues who focus on family business transitions as well. It's not easy stuff, right? And how many of you have experienced having a new hire that was just not it, that did not stick, that was gone really fast? That's, okay, I'm seeing a lot of hands. Yeah, okay, I see 2 hands from 1 person. We'll talk about that separately later. Okay, so again, that's why this stuff matters, because you don't want to do it over and over again. Okay, I like to use examples when I talk through stuff like this, because I enjoy a what not to do type of presentation. So this is going to be our example employer today. His name is Brad. He is Bad Luck Brad. I'm sorry if your name is Brad. This is not about you. Brad locked his keys in his truck already twice, probably did it again since I put these slides together, He doesn't know what his Wi-Fi password is. He locked himself out of his bank account. His dog ate his ATM card, can't file his taxes, and he makes bad hiring decisions. Okay, so he's our example. This is Brad. Okay, he's having a bad time, and we're going to give him a worse time during this presentation. So keep him in mind. He's our what not to do guy. Okay, so we want to figure out how to get the inside information, all of the things we need to know about a candidate before we turn them from a candidate or someone we're interviewing into an employee. So the big hurdle is, how do I figure out, is this person the right person for the job before I have made them my problem in a more permanent way? There are some laws and regulations that make that harder than you might necessarily think it is. You probably all know that there is stuff you cannot do during the hiring process, questions you can't ask. So I want to start with how to not step into it. Now, if I'm Brad and I know things don't usually go well for me, I do not have good luck, I do not have a good time, maybe it makes sense for me to seek out a company that says that they will do all this for me. I'm going to hire backgroundchecks.com, right? And they're going to check all my candidates for me. That sounds great to Brad, right? There's an acronym up there you might not know, FCRA. That is a piece of federal law that it is really easy to step in by accident if you are doing background checks on candidates. So, these companies are really appealing to people, right? They offer these pre-employment background checks that tell you all kinds of stuff about folks that's kind of hard to figure out otherwise. They will tell you what is their work history, but they'll get into, do they have a criminal record, right? Do they have maybe credit problems? Are they bankrupt and maybe they're going to have all these issues that are going to chase them onto the job site? Are you going to get a garnishment for their wages the week after you hire them, right? They'll also offer drug testing services. That seems really handy. Even if you are using backgroundchecks.com or whatever, you still have to be the party responsible for complying with federal law. They cannot do that for you. So if you're using one of these services to try and shortcut a lot of these problems, you still have to know and comply with these rules. So, the Fair Credit Reporting Act sounds irrelevant to this. The name of this act is really sneaky. What is any of what we're talking about hiring? We're not trying to get somebody's credit report. The Fair Credit Reporting Act applies to way more than it sounds like it should. It covers any company that is in the business of dealing with people's background information. The language is written pretty broadly so that these rules apply to background checks in other categories, not just like your credit report from Experian that you get online. So you have to follow these rules. The terms of service usually require that you, as the employer who is hiring them, take on responsibility for providing certain legal disclosures when you use their services. So you have to make those disclosures before you put somebody's information through one of these background check services. Before a background check, you have to let people know that the information that you're getting from them, whether they're filling out a form, whether they're telling you information verbally, their name, address, social security number, whatever, you have to tell them that you are going to use it to complete a background check. But you don't get to just tell them that out loud. It has to be a written notice that is not part of just the standard job application form page. And you have to be clear that you're using that to make decisions about their employment. You have to get written permission. So again, it's not just handing them the form. You have to get them to agree to it in writing. So it's not just hand them the form. They have to sign it and hand it back to you. And then making sure that if it's, oh, hey, I'm going to sign it, get it back to you later, you had the interview, maybe they told you things that would be enough to run the background check, do not press that button on backgroundcheck.com or whatever until you have completed getting that notice to them and getting it handed back to you and confirmed. There are serious statutory penalties. It costs money to screw this up, truly. And there are attorneys, they're not ones who have billboards or bus ads. It's not, for those of you who are coming from Metro Detroit, Mike Morse does not do this, Jumana does not do this. But there are a lot of firms out there who are really active. Like this, law firms seek out people who potentially have these cases. They can go to backgroundcheck.com and get lists of everyone who's used those services and use it to find potential clients who they will help sue you to figure out That's a whole process. It's a big industry, and you don't want to be part of it. So that's why I give all this information and why I make it so dramatic. You don't want to meet those lawyers. They're less fun than me, I promise. Okay, so let's talk to Brad about it. Brad is doing his best. Brad adds this very fancy, lawyery sounding paragraph to his application to disclose that he's going to use backgroundcheck.com. Take a second, read it through. The specific content of it isn't the most important part. That's your hint. Okay, how many of you think that Brad did a good job? Did he get this right? Is he clear, or are the evil attorneys coming for him? Nope. You should know from his name. Bad Luck Brad screwed it up because he put this notice on his job application page. It has to literally be a separate notice, separate piece of paper. Technicalities matter on this, which I know does it make sense from a practical perspective? No, it does not. But that is a separate notice that is required. Don't shove it in an application. Before I go any further, I usually say this at the beginning, but it's bright lights, I got distracted. Nothing that I'm about to say or have already said is legal advice. That's my formal official disclaimer. I can't give you any legal advice from up here. I can give it to you later if you talk. We can do that. It's fine. But just know, because I see a couple people taking pictures of this is not legal advice. I'm just talking. You're welcome to take photos of slides, though. No big deal. Okay, so there are ways that Brad can do this better, namely by taking some of that language and putting it on a separate page. Okay. There are certain states, luckily not specifically in Michigan, but if you operate in multiple states, know that there are other states that have a heightened version of the FCRA standards. So they might have additional, more specific reporting requirements where you have to give them notice some number of days in advance. I'm a lawyer in a couple places. I don't know every state's law, but make sure that if you are hiring in more than one state in the US, that you are keeping an eye on those requirements. Also, if you're hiring in Canada, I can't help you. Please call someone else. But keep an eye on what state you're in. Minnesota and Oklahoma are two that I know are specifically dramatic with what their state requirements are. So, okay. Last thing, an adverse action notice. If you give the right advance notice to somebody you're considering hiring, you go through the background check, congratulations, everything's going amazing, and the background check comes back and says that that candidate is a bad fit. They are an axe murderer, they're bankrupt, they've been fired from every job they've ever had, and you are not moving forward with them based on information that you got from backgroundcheck.com or whatever. You have to let them know, not just before with that, hey, I'm gonna get information on you notice that Brad sent, right? You have to let them know afterward that you chose not to hire them because of information in their background report, if that is why you were choosing not to move forward with them. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on that in both directions. Do it before, do it afterwards. And I don't say all this to scare people away from using these background report services. They can be a huge help. You just have to check a couple boxes when you use them and make sure that you do it right in a way that doesn't cause you more problems than you signed up for. Okay. Let's talk about hiring discrimination, because it's one of those things that you're having a conversation with somebody in the moment, you're interviewing them, and you find yourself thinking, ooh, I want to ask this. Am I allowed to ask this? What are the rules here? I know, I have in my head, there's a list of stuff I'm not supposed to ask about, but it's not super clear, right? And it's a little bit more complicated than it necessarily sounds, right? What you want to avoid is discrimination, right? That's a pretty clear. Generally, when we hear that word, it has pretty negative legal repercussions, discrimination, right? But where is the line between making a decision versus discriminating? So to avoid it crossing that line and being on the discrimination side, we have to make sure that we're not making any hiring decisions based on someone's membership in what we call a protected class. That's a fancy legal term, but it's to say, are they part of a specific group? And what types of groups we're talking about. It does not mean a club. It does not mean are they a Lions fan or whatever. There are specific categories of groups that are relevant under state law and under federal law that we can't be using as the deciding factors. So that's what we're looking for, right? So in making a determination about whether a decision was discriminatory, a lot of the time, if it results in a lawsuit, courts are holding up, okay, you had this person who had A, B, and C on their resume, but was a member of this group, whether it's a religious group or a racial group, ethnic group, they speak a certain language. And then you had someone else who applied who had a really similar set of qualifications but was not in that group. Did they have different outcomes? So that's what you're thinking about, right? If everybody who's in this group gets hired, even if their qualifications are the same as someone who's not in that group who didn't get hired, that's the comparison to have in mind. Now that's really hard to do in the abstract, because you don't have identical twin candidates coming in, one of whom has one religion and the other of whom has another religion, right? It's not a direct comparison. So it's a really subjective test to try and figure out, am I accidentally doing something that could be construed as discriminatory? So how do we stay on the right side of that? Now, talking about the categories that we want to be aware of and thinking about to avoid one of these lawsuits, think about what are the protected classes starting with federal law. This is the list. Race, national origin, which is what country is someone from, whether that's family-wise or them individually. Color, sex, religion, disability, which we'll talk a little bit more about what counts as disability in a minute. Genetic information, that's kind of a funky one because that's things like, do you have a family history of cancer, for example? That can count as genetic information. And age, specifically if they are older than age 40, right? So that's what's protected under federal law. Michigan law is more expansive than that. It's a longer list. So the additional items are in orange here that expand beyond federal law. When we're in Michigan, we have to adhere to both state law and federal law. So take the longer list as your point of reference. So beyond everything that we just talked about, it's also sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, which, just to give you guys a quick context, because I know that those are terms that get mashed together a lot. Gender identity is what someone states their gender to be. Gender expression is how a person dresses, looks, acts, speaks in comparison to their gender. So for example, gender expression would be if I'm a lady, I'm a woman, but I have short hair and I like to wear men's jeans. That's part of gender expression, right? So that's the distinction there that I know confuses folks. Other categories in Michigan specifically, height, weight, right? Age, not just over 40, any age, right? So it's a broader version of the same category. And then arrest record. Now, arrest record is different than criminal history. There's a difference between did you get arrested or did you actually get charged with and convicted of a crime. So you cannot make hiring decisions based on if somebody has just been arrested versus you can make hiring decisions based on if they have been found to have committed a crime and, have been sentenced for it. That's an important distinction too. Also, just again, to make sure that everybody's awake, if you have a question and you want to stop me and yell it at me, I encourage that, please. So if there's any of this that is not making sense, people have follow-up questions, yell, wave your hands around, okay? All right, so those are the categories we're talking about. The other portion of this, it's not just saying, hey, are you a member of this class, right? Are you short? Are you short? Are you tall? Are you green? Whatever. It's not just asking that in a direct way that can be a problem. It's, do you have a hiring policy in how you make your decisions that is going to, in practical effect, have a disparate impact on one group? So the term disparate impact is there a difference that you can tell, right? So it doesn't have to be a direct inquiry into that. It's just, does it have a different result? Now, I know that's not super clear, so we're going to go back to Brad to help us. Brad feels in his heart, it's really important to him that everybody that works at Bad Luck Brad Septic has a really clean-cut personal appearance in a way that he likes and feels good about. And to Brad, it's really, really important to him that everybody have short hair. Long hair grosses him out. It's a personal preference. He just doesn't like it, right? So it is a hiring policy for Bad Luck Brad Septic that everybody has to have short hair. Is that a problem? I hear a yes. I love a yes. Anybody want to say why? If you're feeling super brave. If not, I will not judge you. You're right, that is a problem, because the disparate impact, even though that policy doesn't say I don't hire women or I don't hire people in any particular category, right? The impact of that, because women are much more likely to have longer hair. If you are across the board never hiring people who have long hair, that is a discriminatory, disparate impact, and Brad is likely to end up in a lawsuit about it. Any candidate who is not hired based on that policy could pursue a lawsuit saying, hey, that's targeted at women functionally, even though it doesn't say the word women in it, right? There are a lot of ways that this tends to come up. We'll get into it a little bit further, but there's actually a pretty high-profile case where it was a lawsuit against the U.S. Postal Service, where it was determined that so how many of you have ever gotten an Amazon package delivered on a Sunday? Have you noticed that that started happening in the last 5 years? It's actually the Postal Service, who's supposed to not come on Sundays, who's doing that, right? But the USPS entered into a contract with Amazon where they started doing Sunday deliveries for Amazon packages. So people who had worked as mail carriers for decades and decades, and who had never once been asked to work on a Sunday, were suddenly asked to work on a Sunday, and everyone started getting Sunday shifts. There was a particular mail carrier who was very religious. His religion required that he not do anything on Sundays. They started assigning him Sunday shifts. He didn't show up, and then he got fired, right? And they identified that as a form of employment discrimination. He won that case, even though the policy applied the same to everybody, but because everybody had to take Sunday shifts, that was discriminatory against his religious principles, and he got a pretty big judgment against the Postal Service that came out of our tax dollars, but that's a separate problem. So I say that to mean there's nothing in that policy that was made because of the Postal Service contract with Amazon. It wasn't about him, it wasn't about religion when they wrote it down, but it was a disparate impact. So I know it's a boring legally term, but I hope that those examples help it make a little bit more sense of how that can be relevant to your lives, your hiring, your employment decisions. Okay. What not to ask? This is actually a special requested topic that I know is kind of the most practical bit for you guys. It makes sense, right? You want to know, I'm interviewing somebody. What am I not allowed to say? I know there's stuff I can't say. What is it? So most of the questionable questions, which I feel like is just fun to say, questionable questions, are about, in some way, protected class, right? They're about one of those categories that we can't use to make our hiring decisions. You want to obviously avoid asking people that you are interviewing, hey, are you a member of this religion? Hey, is your family from this country? That is a bad start, because that in itself, now think about it from the perspective of one of the attorneys who pursues these employment discrimination claims, right? And again, those are more fully the back of the bus type people who have the ads, right? These are people on billboards who are sitting there thinking, okay, I want to figure out how can I show that this person who's upset that they weren't hired by Bad Brad Septic, how can I show that the reason they weren't hired was because of their race or their gender or their religion? The way they can do that really easily is if you asked about it in the interview. If you ask about that, why would you ask about something in the interview if it's not part of your decision whether or not to hire somebody? It's really hard to defend having asked about something and then say, well, I just asked about it for fun, I didn't use it, right? So you're putting yourself in a bad position if you ask the question directly no matter what, so skip it. So you can ask questions that may include an answer that gives you some information about that. It just can't be the point of the question. And this is not me saying, hey, ask about it, here's a way to get around this. This information is gonna come up. That's part of what makes this topic so scary. You talk to people about who they are. You wanna understand them. You say, what do you do for fun on the weekends? And they might answer, I go to church, right? And you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, should I just sign myself up for a lawsuit? Should I not ask anybody anything about their lives? You ask, oh, do you have kids? And then they say, oh yeah, I've got 2 kids and actually we've got a baby due next fall. Right? And you're like, oh my gosh, did I just buy myself a lawsuit by asking that? So this is about understanding not how to get away with asking questions that do have a real discriminatory intent. This part I will give for free as official legal advice. Do not attempt to discriminate against protected classes while hiring. There are a lot of attorneys out there who are really good at figuring out when that's happening and making a lot of money off of it. So the best way is to have genuine good intent. All I'm giving advice about right now and talking about is how to not give the appearance by accident that you were discriminating when you really weren't. You're just trying to get to know somebody and find the right fit for your job, right? Okay, so bad luck, Brad. Brad's gonna make a bad decision about hiring, about talking to people. You might have guessed. So first question that Brad is gonna ask is, do you need Sundays off so that you can go to church? Right? It's not a question asking what religion are you, but again, it's that kind of impact. Next question he wants to ask, at your last job, did you have to take a lot of time off for doctor's appointments? Is that one that is a bad idea? Is that an okay question? Right? Think about them, we'll answer them all as a set in a second. And the third one is, you look a little big in the middle, which okay, that's rude, let's not start with that. But is it potentially lawsuit drawing level of rude? Did you have a big lunch, or are you gonna need some time off for maternity leave sometime soon? Right? Again, not generally polite, but is it bad from a legal perspective? Okay, that first one I think is pretty obvious. I kind of gave that away, right? Asking about religion, not a good idea. Indicates that you're making a decision based on a protected class. Asking about medical history or disability. Remember, disability is a protected class under both state and federal law, and in Michigan specifically, asking about genetic information, family medical history is additionally prohibited. So this is potentially a double-header bad idea question, right? And then the last one, besides being incredibly rude, you are hitting multiple bad idea areas. It is asking about weight, which is prohibited in Michigan, and it's asking about pregnancy, which is not only a medical condition, and legally pregnancy counts as a disability. It's a complicated thing, we can talk about it later. There's actually, in addition, a separate pregnancy-specific statute under federal law, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, all the way back in the 70s, that says you really specifically cannot ask someone in an interview about if they are pregnant or if they intend to become pregnant sometime soon. Same thing applies, even if it is somebody who you are perhaps curious about whether their spouse might become pregnant sometime soon if they're trying for a baby. Stay off that topic during interviews. There are a lot of ways to put your foot in it. Recommend avoid staying away from that one. Okay, let's talk about some better options though, because some of these are real practical concerns, right? Brad needs to make a schedule. Do you offer services on Sundays? And you might need somebody who can go out and do jobs on Sundays. You're worried about, is this somebody who can stay as a full-time employee? You want to understand if they're, going to stick around a lot, or if you're going to have to make a lot of schedule accommodations. These are real concerns to answer. The looking a little bigger on the middle one, not so much. Just skip it. But for the first question, right? A better way to address that same thing you would very reasonably want to know when you're hiring is to just ask more broadly. Ask a bigger question. Do you have any specific scheduling needs that I should know about before we move forward? Like, are there days of the week that you just can't work? Right? That'll give you more and better information, because Brad was just asking about Sundays, but maybe actually this person, maybe they're in a specific religion where they can't do Tuesdays, right? Or maybe they have to pick their kid up so they can never work Tuesdays anyway. You learn more asking the broader question, and it's a safer way to go about it. When it comes to time off for doctor's appointments as a question, focus on giving information instead. Say, hey, if you're sick, this is how our company handles it. Do you think that would be an issue for you? Does that work for you? Do you have concerns about that? What kind of leave policies did you have at old jobs? Anything you want to know, right? Give information, ask broader questions so that you can get the same information that you would have gotten from the worst question, probably more useful information as well, right? So asking bigger questions will keep you out of trouble and will also let you get a better sense of who that candidate actually is and how best to proceed. Like I said, the last question, just don't ask that, please, for lots of reasons. Okay. Candidate social media. This is kind of a big one, right? I know it gets complicated really fast, especially if you're in a small community, people know each other. You might want to know, have they posted anything online that might not be good for your business, right? So it's pretty common now. A lot of employers 70% check out applicants' social media profiles as part of their hiring process. So if they have a public social media profile, know that the majority of employers are doing this. And more than half of employers, just a little bit more than half, have actually rejected at least one candidate at some point because of stuff they found online about them, whether that's social media or just what comes up when you Google them, right? So know that there's a distinction between looking at somebody's public social media presence that's associated with their name, what comes up if you Google them, what you can see without being their friend or following them on whatever platform, versus their private social media. So, it's important to know, though, that any time that you look at social media, I mean, there's risk in everything, right? And hiring is a touchy issue. There's a lot of law around it, and it's complicated. That's why I'm talking about it. That's why anyone cares. There is always a risk when you look at social media that you're going to learn something about a protected category, and it can become a problem later and can become a reason that they assert a discrimination claim, right? It is really hard to draw a straight line between what the thing is in an interview that made you not want to hire them and exactly each thing that you know about them. And it's really hard to prove that your decision not to hire them was based on one thing and not another. So the more information that you get about somebody that they did not choose to give you themselves, the more you're opening up that level of risk. But no, you get to make an informed decision. It can be really important for employers to understand what their employees are doing online. It can impact stuff a lot, right? Especially if you're in a small community. Sometimes you need to know, but just know you're taking on some theoretical amount of risk. Now, one version of this, one example, was an instance, and this is actually, it's a federal employment discrimination case, so it was against the Philadelphia Parking Authority, but it's still useful because we're talking about federal law here, right? So the same rules apply across the board when we're talking about federal law. Somebody was fired from their position. Again, the standards are the same, so we can, even though it's a decision about getting fired as opposed to not getting hired, it works the same. So we can use it as an example to help us guide our decisions and know what to do. So someone was fired from their position with the Philadelphia Parking Authority because his supervisors had looked at his Facebook page and determined that he was a gay man, right? So, did they have potentially other reasons for that? Was that the only actual reason they moved forward with firing? They claimed it wasn't, but it becomes impossible to tell, and if the timing lines up just wrong, the actual intention doesn't end up mattering. You can get to the same result, and the result isn't, at the very least, even if you win the lawsuit and you are able to prove somehow that wasn't the way you made the decision, having the lawsuit is not fun. Avoiding it is the better option, right? So just know that if you are looking at folks' social media, there is the potential that that could be used in a negative way if you choose not to hire that candidate. So assess for you and your business, how important is what they post online to their ability to do their job? What you see may or may not be actually relevant to how they do their job. So for each position, is it somebody that is community facing? Are they taking phone calls? Are they knowing people's names and people know their names? Or maybe their social media isn't actually going to be relevant to their ability to do the job, and you choose not to look at it. So make sure that you're making an active choice about that, not just Googling everybody because it's easy and it's right there. So Bad News Brad is going to make a new friend, right? He is really concerned about this potential new hire, and he thinks they might have posted maybe a mean review about his company online, but he can't see it with a quick Google. And he says, I think that I'm going to add a box to my interview form that they fill out, and that box is going to be, please give me your Facebook password here so that I can log in and look at what you've posted, right? And look and see if you're messaging people about how much you hate Bad Luck Brad's Septic, right? Is that allowed? It is not. In the state of Michigan, you are not allowed to ask people for their login information. You also cannot make them add you as a friend as a condition of applying for that job. That's what when I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between their public online social media presence and their private presence. If you cannot get to it just from the general search from the outside, there are legal protections that surround it. So the two questions are, is it legal and is it a good idea? The answer is no for both. So understanding the why, I think, is really important here. If the issue is, hey, Brad's new employee is gonna be somebody public facing, but that social media isn't visible to the public, then it can't have a negative consequence, right? If it's not for the public and the public can't see it, how is it gonna negatively impact your business's reputation, right? So the law makes that distinction, so understanding that and understanding where the lines are and what you can dig into on a potential new hire is gonna make a big difference for you. So just make sure that you're not just looking stuff up or pushing into things or digging because you can, because digging too much without taking the right precautions can actually cause you more problems, because even if you find something that tells you, oh, I didn't want to hire that person, if you found it in the wrong way, you might have bought yourself an unpleasant lawsuit if they happen to know one of those people on the back of a bus. So I know this is a little bit of a downer topic. I do not have a crystal ball or answer of exactly where you can go and find the right candidates. But I think the biggest takeaway I can give everybody is when you are looking for the right person, ask broader questions, ask bigger questions to actually get to know more about them, and focusing in on specifics, focusing on like, hey, here's an area where I had a bad experience. That, whoever it was that raised two hands about having a candidate they hired that didn't work out, don't just think about what went wrong with that person. Ask more broadly so you focus on finding the right person, not on weeding out the wrong person. So I know, like I said, I'm the last thing between you guys and the bar. So if you don't have questions, I won't be offended. You are more than welcome to yell them out now if your heart desires, or I will stick around a little bit so that we can chat about anything, hiring, contracts, lawyery, everything. My business cards are floating around anywhere. This is my cell number. It works the most consistently. Ooh, we have someone awake. How do you ask about physical ability without running into some of these problems? Like, these are physical jobs a lot of the time where you gotta do stuff and they have to be able to do stuff. And you are looking at someone and going, ooh, I don't know if you can do the stuff. That is a great example of ask the question you actually wanna ask. If the job that they're doing requires that they be able to lift heavy things for 8 hours a day, ask them straight up, can you lift heavy things for 8 hours a day? Give me an example of work you've done in the past where you lifted heavy things for 8 hours a day. Describe it in detail, and how did it go for you? Did you like that job? How long did you work there? None of that is about their physical appearance. None of it is about disability. It's getting straight to the question you actually wanted to ask, which is like, can you do the thing? That's the best way to do it, and it's very possible. I mean, look, maybe if there's a thing called reasonable accommodation, right? That's the standard of there's a difference between having to cater to everybody regardless of what they have going on, so that you have to bend over backwards and make it so that they can do the job no matter what, versus a reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation means that there's a pretty easy, pretty functional way that you can make the job work for them. Height is a protected class in Michigan, and if you're thinking, ooh, I don't know, this person is really short, they're gonna have a hard time operating this piece of machinery, and you ask the question the way that I just asked it, have you had a job where you worked with this piece of machinery that most people who use it are over 6 foot? You know that. But you say, hey, have you used this before? How did it go? And they say, oh, I actually have. It went great. I bring my own step stool. I carry it with me everywhere, and I stand on it whenever I need it, right? That's a reasonable accommodation, that they carry around their little step stool and they make it work. If that works, you can do that. And that's really the answer you wanted, right? You don't want to lose your ideal candidate just because they looked shorter than the last guy who had the position. So that's why I think ask the question you really want to ask about, can they do the job, and let them tell you how. And you'll know if they're full of it and they haven't actually done that before, you're going to know because you know your business and you know what you're talking about. If they don't, you'll have a sense. So the question is, if you have, so apparently there is somebody out there who actually is showing up with their own step stool, basically, who is someone who is really short, having a tough time physically executing the capabilities of the job. But that candidate came in and said, yes, I can do this. I've got a step stool, I'm on it, and she couldn't. You're right, that is really hard to pick out in the hiring process, because there's gonna be somebody who can bring their step stool and do it, and there's gonna be somebody who can't, and who that doesn't actually work for. One, I think you had a sense probably pretty early on that it wasn't gonna work out, because if she had a real solution, if she had experience doing it and could tell you how she did it last time, and that's the kind of thing that you're gonna know. So I think you knew at that moment. If it is not possible, even with an accommodation for somebody to do the job because of their physical situation, then there is no reasonable accommodation that can fix the problem, and not hiring that person for that role is okay. That's the difference between a reasonable accommodation and bending over backwards. You don't have to bend over backwards. You don't have to hire someone who can't do the job, because in that situation, there's not a way to set her up to successfully do the job. A step stool is not going to do the trick. It wasn't going to work. Not hiring somebody for that reason is totally allowed. And not retaining an employee for that reason, because maybe you've tried an accommodation and it doesn't work. Not retaining an employee because there's no fix to what's wrong is allowed. But again, that's a separate PowerPoint. That's a longer conversation about the details of it, but none of this is to say that because somebody is in a protected class, you have to keep them as an employee forever, you are doomed. You just have to understand how to address things like that. Okay, I hear the movement of food and beverages being set up, so I'm going to give everybody one last chance for questions. I have great news for you. Your hour is up. You have earned your credit. It has been wonderful to talk with you all. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Go get food and beverages, and thank you. Feel free to bug me if you want to chat.